As Trump is formally arraigned, and I'm actually recording this video right about as it's happening, so I'll have to save commentary on that for later, but Biden's strategy in response has been to say absolutely nothing about it, refuse all questions, even if it's the only question that reporters want to ask.
I'm not going to talk about Trump's indictment. I have no comment at all on Trump. I have no comment on Trump.
And if you're cynical or realistic enough to believe that this is all part of a broader political strategy, well, then that approach for Biden actually makes some sense. Leave me alone, focus on Trump. Pay no attention to what I'm doing, focus on Trump. Villainize Trump, and then hide in the basement. That is the strategy that got him elected, apparently. And so it is the strategy that continues. Though Biden does, of course, try to attract the attention his way some of the time, commonly attempting some economic magic, even though the minimally skeptical observer can easily spot the flaws in his tricks. Oh, look, gas prices are way down, he says, compared to the all-time high set under his watch just under a year ago. Oh, look, inflation is moderating, he says, compared to the multi-decade high set under his watch just under a year ago. Yeah, but look at all the jobs we've created, he says, by digging out of the ditch that government dug in the first place. It's amazing how everything looks improved when compared to historically terrible figures. It's not hard to crack the secret to this trick. Well, now there's another context in which the propaganda is quickly crashing into reality if we're smart enough to compare what the president says to what is actually happening. Outside of gas prices and inflation and jobs being slightly better than his records for worst ever or worst in a long time, lately he likes to brag about small business creation. In fact, he set the record earlier this year, according to Census Bureau data. 10.5 million small businesses formed under Biden's tenure, the all-time highest number for a 2-year period. And the president's small business administrator praised him for historic investment that has brought small businesses back from the brink of fighting just to stay open. Even the claim on its own has a major asterisk, of course. When Biden took office, we were losing hundreds of thousands of businesses, right? So how many of these new businesses are truly new wealth creation? And how much of it is just a return to the status quo that we already had prior to the obscene government intervention? And by the way, according to the White House itself, the damage was far greater than just a few 100,000 small businesses lost. Kamala Harris said we lost a third of all small businesses in this country during the pandemic.
Sadly, during the course of the pandemic, 1/3 of our small businesses have closed.
And that's a claim that PolitiFact fact-checked as true. If there are about 30 million small businesses in this country, according to the Small Business Administration, and about a third of them were lost, that's 10 million gone. The same figure the president now brags about creating. There is a caveat that it's unclear if those closures were temporary or permanent, so that figure is probably high-end, but the economist experts quoted in this fact check acknowledge nobody knows the number with certainty. But even if that estimate is high-end, the point remains, I'm just listening to their numbers. They are telling me they lost 10 million small businesses and then created 10 million small businesses. That's not growth. That's not an achievement. That's just slitting your own wrist and then stitching it back up and saying you're stronger for the wound. But there's a bigger problem with this propaganda, and that is the measurement. Every time Joe Biden and company brag about this business creation, all they are referencing is applications, as in initial formation filings with government agencies. They aren't measuring goods actually created. They aren't measuring services actually provided. They aren't measuring employees actually hired. They aren't measuring a single dollar actually exchanged. All they are measuring is someone simply writing down that they intend to attempt these things in the future. And so fittingly, during his State of the Union address, Biden described starting a small business as an act of hope.
A record 10 million Americans applied to start new businesses. 10 million. Every time someone starts a small business is an act of hope.
Even if flowery, that description is actually perfectly accurate. All he's measuring with the data in this case is hope. It's just hope with paperwork, that's all. The point is, business applications are not a measure of success. Businesses actually surviving to produce is. Biden loves to brag about all of this supposed small business creation, but without demonstration of these businesses actually succeeding, crushed by inflation, rising interest rates, labor shortages, product shortages, and all the rest, there's now another ominous record emerging that the politicians and their media allies tend not to talk about: bankruptcies. In alarming numbers, small businesses are now failing to meet their financial obligations and folding. Small businesses are now filing for bankruptcy at not just a high rate, but at a rate, in fact, higher than the pandemic or lockdown peak. This according to analysts at UBS Bank and confirmed by data from the American Bankruptcy Institute. In February, there were nearly 32,000 private bankruptcy filings, as in personal and small business. That's an 18% increase on the year prior. And yes, most insanely, these are numbers well beyond the worst of actual lockdown itself. February's rolling weekly average for bankruptcy filings nationwide was nearly 8,000. That's almost twice the rate of the worst of the pandemic or lockdown era set in June 2020 at 4,500 filings a week. But yeah, just imagine how bad it would have been if the government hadn't intervened. That's the assurance to which we're still supposed to cling. First, they'll shut down your business by force, and then if you manage to somehow survive that, they'll get you with the impossible market conditions they created. These numbers are concerning enough for their own sake, obviously. Every one of these bankruptcy filings represents a hope shattered, to borrow the president's language, and often they represent much more than that, too. Employees let go, contracts severed, bills unpaid, Main Street storefronts shuttered and vacant. But worse still, there are significant indirectly related consequences that are sure to follow as well. Even if you personally didn't shop at that store that's now bankrupt, your town is going to hurt for its loss. The UBS analysts note that 40% of the loans and debts of these small businesses declaring bankruptcy are held by small regional and community banks. As these banks now see debts unmet, lower deposit rates, and tighter overall financial conditions, their ability to lend to other businesses will now be damaged. In addition to the lending damage already done by the higher interest rates imposed by the Fed to counter the inflation for which the government is also primarily responsible, of course. All of that means that more neighborhood businesses suffer, and more of the neighborhood banks that support them suffer, and the ones in the best position to survive all of that difficulty are the ones that Biden and company commonly claim to oppose: the biggest businesses and the biggest banks with the biggest friends in Washington. But of course, Biden wants you to believe that he's going to take it to them to get us out of this mess. He'll raise their taxes to make up for the losses. Well, on principle, good luck with taxing your way to prosperity. But even on the specifics, he's not just proposing to tax the prosperous. He is proposing a tax increase on the very small businesses that are currently suffering and failing. Biden's proposed budget calls for an increase of the corporate tax rate to 28%, up from the 21% rate set during the Trump years. He likes you to believe that's just a simple and justified scoop from the money pits that Amazon and Walmart are hoarding, but it isn't. In fact, a quarter of the businesses registered as corporations are the same small businesses that are now suffering. And even if we did change the plan to go after the major corporations only, well, that strategy is looking like it has its limitations too. Because according to the same data, Chapter 11 bankruptcies, which are more commonly used by larger businesses, increased 83% year on year in February. It's not exactly new wisdom if we had the sense to listen to what history tells us. If your plan is to swipe from other people's wallets, there are only so many wallets to swipe.
I think they've made the biggest financial mess that any government's ever made in this country for a very long time. And socialist governments traditionally do make a financial mess. They always run out of other people's money.
Worse still, we not only can't listen to history's wisdom, apparently we can't even decipher it from the nonsense that we've just personally witnessed ourselves. Government shut down businesses. Government then filled that productivity void with funny money that's not based on any actual production, and so it buys less and less by the day. And to the businesses that were actually strong enough to survive that meddling, we now propose to punish them further still and say, it's time you paid your fair share, because it's not enough just to damage the ability to be productive and create wealth, apparently. we have to damage the incentive to do it too. I'd cite the "this is fine" meme for anybody who seriously buys into this philosophy, but I think it's a depiction of far too much luxury, actually. Because if you take this philosophy to its full extent, you aren't going to have the comforts of the coffee at all. That is just way too optimistic. Unless it's brewed with ground dollars instead of ground beans, then it's pretty realistic. Homebrew, of course, because your favorite local spot down the street just closed up shop. Either that or they're charging $10 a cup and you just can't afford that. But don't worry though, because it's all going to get better very quickly once Starbucks finally pays their fair share. So just wait it out until then. And of course, ignore all the evidence otherwise in the meantime. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it.